Welcome to the Atlanta River Time Roundtable, our ramble about the river. We'll have 5 rounds. This reminded me as we were putting it together of something that may predate many of you, and that was the rumble in the jungle. Was Muhammad Ali and George Foreman, maybe, is that who it was? Famous boxing match in the 70s, I guess. And so we won't be actually doing battle here exactly, but I do hope we'll have a lively conversation, and I'll ring the bell for the various rounds that we'll have. But during this talk, you can keep your phones on and feel free to tweet about this at the hashtag RiverTimeATL. But turn your watches and clocks off, the ones that are linked to universal coordinated time and set by atomic clock mechanisms. Right now, take them off, stuff them in your pockets, just let out a deep breath and open up to a different, more meandering flow. Also, I ask that unless you're speaking, that you go on mute. Though we do welcome questions and ask that you post those in chat, and we'll cover those as we go, and also we'll have time at the end, and we can y'all can come off mute when the time's right, and we can discuss those later in the session. So we're here because we recently proposed that the Chattahoochee River become Atlanta's new time standard, and today we've assembled some luminaries to help unpack that provocation. And I'm excited to introduce them to you, but first let me introduce myself, my dimmer, not so luminary self. I'm Andrew Dietz, and I'm a partner with the marketing firm Creative Influence. I'm producer of Atlanta Marketing Creative Influence. And I'm author of the recent book, Follow the Meander, an indirect route to a more creative life, which was inspired in large part by the concept of river time and by its creator, who is featured in that book, Jonathon Keats. And the book also includes the inventor Buckminster Fuller, about whom Jonathon Keats wrote the most recent biography, and others, including another luminary on the call today, Michael Elliston, who is one of America's senior most Zen masters, founded the Atlanta Soto Zen Center, and is also an artist, writer, musician, and creative provocateur in his own right. And then before we go further, let me also say a special thank you to Flux Projects and its executive director, Archer Dennington. And thank you for being here and for making all this possible.
I'm gonna go. It's just a.
And Flux Projects, if you're not familiar with it, its mission is to produce temporary art projects that connect and grow artists and audiences in Atlanta through the creative power of place, mostly public art focused. And Flux is the prime mover, bringing Jonathon Keats and River Time to Atlanta, and we're very grateful. And thanks also to Southfork Conservancy. I think we have Sally Sears, one of the co-founders, on the call right now. You may remember Sally from broadcast television fame in Atlanta on the news. And Southfork Conservancy is an organization helping to revitalize Peachtree Creek. Also Chattahoochee Now. I want to thank Chattahoochee Now. We have Jodi Mansbach on the call with us, and who will be one of the panelists. But Chattahoochee Now's been helping Atlantans discover that we actually are a city on a river. And also the Serenbe Institute for Art, Culture, and the Environment, and its Air Serenbe Artist Residency Program. And we have Michael Bettis here with us. I'll introduce Michael in a minute. But Air Serenbe Artist Residency Program will be base camp for Atlanta River Time brainstorming when Jonathon Keats comes to town later this year. And so we have with us today representatives from some of those groups on our panel and more. Michael Bettis Michael is programming director with Air Serenbe. And for those of you who don't know Serenbe, well, first of all, you're missing out. But I recommend you read about it and go there. It's an idyllic arts and crafts, new urbanism style village in Chattahoochee Hills along the Chattahoochee, which is along the Chattahoochee River, just south of Atlanta. And Serenbe is a community dedicated to wellness and the arts, and arts are an integral part of that. And Serenbe, Air Serenbe, in addition to hosting its artist in residence program, also runs the Filmer program, which matches filmmakers with artists. And we have on the call listening in, and hopefully we'll maybe say a few words later, Ethan Payne, who is a filmmaker based in Athens and has been, as he told us just before the call, spending the last, I don't know, year or so filming rivers. And he's been paired with Jonathon Keats and will document Atlanta River time as it kicks off. So Michael Bettis, programming director, welcome there, Serenbe. And we have Jodi Mansbach as one of our great champions in Atlanta for sustainable and kind of life-affirming placemaking in Atlanta. Super smart. After earning degrees from Yale and Northwestern and a master's in city and regional planning from Georgia Tech, Jodi served as VP of Development and Sustainability at Jamestown, where she was instrumental in the success of the launch of Ponce City Market, and has also helped pioneer Atlanta City Studio, the City of Atlanta's first pop-up urban design center. She's co-founder of Chattahoochee Now, which, as I mentioned earlier, is focused on raising awareness and interaction among Atlantans with a 53-mile corridor of the Chattahoochee River, from the south end of National Recreation Area down to Chattahoochee Bend State Park. As the Atlanta River Time project revolves around and literally within the Chattahoochee River, Jodi and Chattahoochee Now have been instrumental in our efforts. And then maybe a guy who doesn't need a lot of introduction. I hope you all know Ryan Gravel. If you don't know Ryan, you know his brainchild, the Atlanta Beltline, which has literally changed the face of Atlanta. Ryan's also the CEO of a number of businesses with really cool names. Next time I start something, I want Ryan to name it. He's got Generator, Elevator, and Aftercar. Those are some of them, but his flagship is Six Pitch, which is an urban design consultancy that leverages physical infrastructure across cities, across the country, around the world, I guess, to shape cultural and economic outcomes the way the Beltline has, to improve the way of life in our cities. Most recently, Ryan's been very involved in the role in river-related projects. And so we're excited to have Ryan with us. And of course, last but not least, Jonathon Keats. Jonathon is a world-renowned American conceptual artist and experimental philosopher. And while I'm going to recommend a book that he's written many books, but there is a book about to come out about him, or has just come out about him. And I really recommend you get it. I'll flash it up on the screen in a bit. But if you have a minute, and just divert your attention while we talk, you can go check him out on Wikipedia. It's what he has done is astounding, fascinating, fun, funny, thought-provoking. He is known for his large-scale thought experiments. Everything from copywriting his own brain, claiming it's a product he built neural network by neural network, to genetically engineering God in a petri dish, to I could just go on, and I will in a bit. He's also a journalist. He's written for Wired and Forbes, all kinds of publications. He's an author, I think 6 books, Jonathon, maybe. And he's also a gentleman. And I got to know Jonathon Keats probably 16 or so years ago. We were introduced by a literary agent who thought we'd hit it off, and we did. And Jonathon was a coach and mentor to me in the first book I wrote called The Last Folk Hero. about contemporary folk art in the South, and some of the interesting situations that came about with artists Thornton Dial, Lonnie Holly, and so on. And then Jonathon and I and David Edmund Moore, who's a filmmaker on the call today, did a project together where we created a new art movement, agri-folk art. You could see The Language of Limbs on YouTube, and you can see that film, but that's how I've gotten to know Jonathon. So, as I think I've talked so much, I've hyperventilated, so we will move right on to it. Atlanta is a city that was built really, I guess, because of or around and on the railroad, right? Even though we have a river, and you would have thought that's what would have been the core of building here, but no, it was the railroad. And in fact, go to the Atlanta History Center, and what's front and center in the window but a train, right? And then our only so trains run on time. Trains are about efficiency and about a fast pace, and along with that, we're known as the city too busy to hate. We're about movement and speed and getting things done, efficiency, mechanical, Georgia Tech engineering. Our only clock that I know of that's famous, you may know of others, I guess there's some clock towers around town. The one I think of is the one that was associated with Rich's department store, so also commerce related clock. But we do have a river here as well. And so what would happen if we shifted gears from Atlanta as terminus to Atlanta as maybe confluence of river and time? And so I want to have us kick off with Jonathon and let Jonathon talk to us about this idea of river time, where that came from. And maybe, Jonathon, if you can put that in a broader context of other time-related projects you've done, that'd be great.
Well, thank you for inviting me to participate in this roundtable, and for inviting me to become part of the Atlanta.
Jonathon, I don't know if you're on your phone as well as.
I am not. I think that there might be.
If everybody else wouldn't mind muting, that'd be great. And I'll do the same. Go ahead.
So, yes, thank you for allowing me to be a part of the Atlanta community, at least in proxy, and shortly to be there in person. I've been thinking about time for a long time. And the interest that I have comes out of, I think, an attempt at figuring out how we got where we are as a society from the sustainable world that was long before I was born to a world today that is on the verge of the sixth mass extinction, that is facing rampant climate change, and has really not yet come to terms with that, yet still continues to try to put it in terms of technologies and other technologies that might come along that could potentially repair the problems that have been brought about as a result of technologies from the past. And what I've been really interested in trying to do is to step back and to ask how we got here and whether there might be something more fundamental that we might think about changing. And it seems to me that while it is a gross oversimplification, nevertheless, there is an argument to be made that time is a culprit, not a culprit where we can say that time itself is to blame, but how we have used time has resulted in a world that is really becoming increasingly unwieldy and increasingly unmanageable, which is ironic because our control of time really was a matter of trying to take control of the world. So by my reckoning, time really gains traction in an industrialized way, along with the Industrial Revolution, along with the rise of the railroads, as Andrew alluded to earlier, that basically we go from time as reckoned in the environment to an abstraction, which is at this stage based on the pulsation of a cesium atom. And these atomic clocks and the mechanical clocks that preceded them allowed for a disconnect of human society, human civilization from the natural world that allowed for building, allowed for the control of labor forces, that allowed for the rise of globalism and multinational corporations. And a lot of good came out of that in terms of the fact that we have comfortable lives that probably are a lot more fulfilling in certain ways, and certainly a lot easier than the lives of in Paleolithic times. But nevertheless, there's been a deep cost, as I alluded to earlier. And so what I've been trying to do is to figure out what it would take for us to reconnect with time as reckoned before we got ourselves into the current situation of a world that is run by us and mismanaged horribly by our poor decisions, by our insensitivity, I believe, to the consequences of our actions. And so I started with a cliche because cliches usually have deep truths that they are trying to tell us. And the cliche is that rivers flow, and so does time. So I started to think about what would happen if we were to start to pay attention to the flow of rivers and to allow that to be the basis upon which we reckon time instead of using the abstraction of the cesium atom or of the mechanical clock, that instead of being able to override the environment in terms of the decisions that we make and the ways in which we coordinate, that instead we would embed our actions within the activities of the planet itself, and therefore create a feedback loop where the consequences of our actions are manifested not only in the environment, but in the time that is shown through the environment. So you might imagine putting a water wheel into a river, into Chattahoochee, for instance, where the water wheel is calibrated to run at 1 revolution per minute, and then build clockwork on the basis of that, and then build a calendar, and then stand back and allow that clock to have authority in terms of telling us what time it is. And this is what I've done in Alaska already with a project that I've been working on for the past couple of years, not putting a water wheel literally into the Matanuska or one of the other glacially fed rivers, which wouldn't last very long given how harsh the weather is in Alaska, but using the US Geological Survey as a basis for data that will run a clock that will run more rapidly as flow increases and more slowly as flow decreases. And a number of things happen as a result of this, one of which is that there are seasonal fluctuations, and there always have been, but we've largely disconnected from seasonality, not in terms of noticing that it's snowing out or that it's raining, but in terms of the decisions that we make on the clock. we try to ignore the changes that happen in the seasons in terms of our planning. There's also the stochastic nature of the system, the fact that it is always changing and changing in ways that are fundamentally unpredictable. And that is something else that we've tried to eliminate as a matter of trying to eliminate uncertainty from our everyday lives. And then thirdly, there is the long-term trend that in the case of a glacially fed river, for instance, one in Alaska, as a result of climate change, there will be an increase and then a decrease in flow until potentially there's no flow at all, until the river stops flowing. And by the reckoning of river time, time might just stop. So what this does potentially is that it brings two qualities that I think are really important into our everyday lives by taking what's happening on the river, putting it into the vernacular of time, and making it manifest in ways that are immediately recognizable to us. The clock face, the municipal clock, which, as you saw from Andrew's slide just a moment ago, was in the form of a projection on the Anchorage Museum, or also in terms of ways in which we can use this time signal, this time protocol in our everyday lives by way of a website, such as the one that's currently on screen. That this can be a way in which to bring both a sense of the moment with the seasonality and also with the unpredictability and therefore contingency, that we have to be constantly attentive to the environment in which we live, and that we can't plan ahead with hubris. We can't simply assume that everything will work out according to our plans. And yet at the same time, we need to have some sort of larger, longer term vision, some foresight that is effectively informed by the environment and by our impact on it, whether that is impact that is deliberate or inadvertent or a combination of those. So basically what I'm trying to do with these projects, with River Time as a proposition, is to create a sort of observatory in the form of a clock, an observatory that allows us to observe ourselves through the environment in which we live, and to calibrate our lives both in terms of the uncertainty toward a greater humility, and also in terms of the larger view of the effects of what we do, of the decisions that we make, that can inform our decisions going forward. And ideally, although these are in a sense contradictory impulses, we actually need that contradiction, I think. And we also, I think, need the cognitive disconnect between time as we currently reckon it and time as told by the river. And as you can see in the case of Alaska, time told by many different rivers, each one of which has its own flow, so that there's a localization that is happening in tandem with a larger picture, a global view of how the environment is changing. And that, again, is a really important sort of dichotomy that we can bring into our lives. So River Time is ultimately a philosophical proposition or is a provocation, but it is also a practical attempt at giving people a tool, a means by which to enter into a relationship with the landscape, to recognize the fact that we are really a part of nature, not apart from it, and to use technology through the creation of a municipal clock in the middle of Atlanta, I hope, through various activations on the rivers that bring people to the rivers, through ways in which people can use this time as a scheduling app, or potentially, as we've done in Alaska, that music can be calibrated, where there's a metronome that is running on river time, that you can experience it viscerally, or potentially a municipal bond that might have its interest rate reckoned by, or its payout for interest reckoned by the river. that all of these can be ways in which to bring this into our everyday lives, which I'm hoping in Atlanta to do with all of you, people who live there, who can help to figure out how to make this meaningful, both in terms of the rivers and streams and creeks there, and also in terms of how people live their lives. So
let me interrupt for 1 second and just note for everybody that right now, if we were on river time in Alaska, it would be July 18th. So anyway, and Sunday for that matter. But
and it's been running for about 6 months now. And as you can see, it is both telling you the time and the moment, but also in aggregate. So that date may end up 100 years ahead or 20 years behind. And what I'm asking people in Alaska to do is to accept that as an equally legitimate authority. And I'm working now with Earth Law Center on legislation that will recognize river time as an alternative time standard, which again, in Atlanta, I think would be a really interesting proposition.
so Jonathan, your first effort at this was in Alaska last summer and this past fall. I know you're doing something in Switzerland, and you've talked to folks in Telluride. So what is Atlanta about? Why Atlanta, and what do you see doing here? Obviously, we talked about this kind of digital clock based on the flow of the river. But say more about why Atlanta and what you see different here.
I'm fascinated by, as you alluded to earlier, the fact that Atlanta is on a river and yet was formed by the railroad, and that the railroad really is the ultimate embodiment of time as controlled by humans. And all of the ways in which, in contrast to Alaska, which remains very much a place where rivers run through places in a way that people are interacting with them constantly, that in Atlanta, from what I've heard, the Chattahoochee is somewhat of a mystery. So I'm interested in trying to take the larger picture for the whole planet, how we can create a planetary river time that is an aggregate of aggregates, and how we can in each place think about river time and rivers that are, as a result of river time, reactivated in people's lives, how this can be a way in which to reactivate those rivers, how the Chattahoochee, Peachtree Creek, how these really important waterways and the drainage that they are essential for, how that can become more present in people's lives, and how that can potentially change how people look at the landscape and how people think about ecology as a matter of their politics and their everyday lives. But it is also, I think, a matter of considering how Atlanta is very true to the railroad, as you also, Andrew, as you alluded to earlier, in terms of really living that reality of time as something that is a top-down proposition, something that is controlled by humans. What would it mean taking the least likely place in the world, and I don't know that Atlanta is the least likely place, but there's something that is highly unlikely about calibrating time based on a river that is somewhat mysterious to many and absolutely unknown as a place that anyone has gone to, in the case of many people who you speak to there. That taking that and saying that that actually is central to people's lives, it's kind of the ultimate challenge. And it's a challenge that I think I'm very interested in taking up with Atlantans to figure out what would it take to do it in that environment, in order, first of all, to figure out how can we do it anywhere. And I'm currently, as Andrew alluded to earlier, working in a number of different places that range from Telluride, where the river is absolutely, this is San Miguel, is absolutely central to people's lives and is very present right through the center of town, to Vienna, where the Danube is legendary and where there's a long history of the Danube having influence over absolutely every attribute of people's lives, and yet it is a city that operates like any modern city does in a way that tries to take control over that river, to Atlanta, where there are waterways, but those waterways are largely either controlled or are ignored altogether, and where it becomes possible, I think, through time, which is something that we all share, something that's familiar to all of us, something that is actually central to our lives, and therefore whatever rides on it will become central to our lives, at least hypothetically. That by taking the rivers there, I think that it becomes a really interesting, it becomes an interesting proposition globally, which is a really essential proposition locally. And in addition to thinking about that proposition in the middle of the city, that municipal clock, and also the time protocol that you can use for your smartwatch, I'm also really interested in the waterways such as Peachtree Creek, that we can make activations on the waterway. So I've been looking at the possibility of using erosion as a way in which to reckon time.
Mm.
You might imagine stone tablets in a creek where you incise the date, and you do so for dates going forward generationally in 25-year increments over a 1,000-year period, where the depth to which you cut the date for each one of these tablets, on each one of these tablets, for each one of these future years, is calibrated by the current average annual flow for the river, in the same way that I'm proposing to do with the water wheel, or the equivalent of it, the gauging station, using that as a basis for river time on the clock, speeding up or slowing down. Likewise, in this case, just as a natural phenomenon, the rate of erosion will be ahead of or behind the predicted rate based on the decisions that we make, based on the world in which we live. So it becomes a way in which to connect with future generations, and to think about ourselves in relation to future generations by virtue of the observation of time through the flow of this creek over stone, and walking the creek until you reach the date, or potentially making a rubbing for each date, and keeping a calendar at home that becomes an heirloom, that this becomes a way in which to reckon time according to that creek. But it also, because you can see into the future, so to speak, you can therefore make a sort of a commitment to the future in a way that recognizes the fluctuation, but also the need for making good decisions now in order to ensure there is still a that creek is flowing in a way that is able to sustain the large. And this ideally becomes a way in which to connect the city with all the waterways that run through it, with people's lives, such that people are drawn out to these waterways to interact with them. It's only by getting in the water, it's only by interacting with these waterways, I think, that we get that sort of visceral connection that will really make change in the world. And people talk about going onto river time. This is, again, one of these cliches, but it's a cliche that once again speaks the truth. Going on a float, which is something that's very familiar to many Atlantans, to many people in Georgia, and how that recalibrates you, at least for the time that you're on the creek, how or on the river, how that becomes something that is a regular phenomenon, regular part of your everyday life. You're visiting on a regular basis. That seems like it's an essential change, which many people already are doing that, but which I think can become more widespread, can become more a matter of what people just take for granted. That if you want to know what time it is, sure, you can go to the middle of town and you can check the clock, and that becomes a locus for action because it brings people together. You can check your smartwatch if you have one, or go online and find out what time it is in terms of river time. But more importantly, you can go to the river itself and you can find out. And you can find out in a way that's far more immersive. And the immersiveness of time, immersing ourselves in the environment through time as a prompt, really nothing more than that, for a much fuller view of all of the ways in which the environment is an observatory, all the ways in which the living system of the environment is observing itself, and we can observe that environment together with that living system and with all of the beings living within it, that can become a fundamental shift in how we view the world and how we envision the world going forward.
Well, a couple things. One, just administratively, everybody, if you would, I want to remind you, I tried to put everybody on mute, but sometimes people bounce off. If you can make sure you're on mute as we go through this, that would be appreciated until it's time to talk, just so we can hear our speakers clearly. But so let me just recap, Jonathan. Here you're talking about a few different pieces. One is the gauging station as sort of water wheel, if you will, to tell time. Possibly some physical structures in the river, such as stepping stones with markings to measure erosion. We've talked about possibly a municipal clock gathering and portraying this data. River time, right? Those are a few of the items.
Yes, and then also we're going to be running some workshops soon that will bring people out to rivers and creeks, and we'll challenge people to make their own almanac, where that almanac will be a way in which to reckon time going forward, and where it will involve making a visit to your local creek every month, having made your own booklet, and making an observation every month, where those become calibration points in future years for finding out what month it is. And the month might deviate from the months as told by your wall calendar or by your computer, but those months have a ground truth to them as well. And it becomes a way in which to see the environment through change and to consider change in terms of what the causes are, such that it can calibrate not only what time it is and the reckoning of what time it is, but who we are and what we need to be doing.
Right. I just want to, there's some great chat comments coming up, but one of them earlier was, what's the mystery about the Chattahoochee? And I want to, if we can just turn for a minute to Jodi. And Jodi, you know, I love the front of your website, Discover Our Hidden Riverfront. And can you just talk a little bit about, you know, your interest in this project, Chattahoochee Now, and maybe answer that question about, you know, what, you know, probably everybody on this call knows there's a river, but not everybody in Atlanta does.
Right. Sure. Thanks, Andrew. So yeah, Jonathan asked some really deep and some really profound, but really fundamental questions about the river. I came to this work by asking a really simplistic question, which is, where is the river? I moved to Atlanta. I'll just tell you my story. Is I moved to Atlanta 25 years ago from Chicago, where my life very much was oriented, at least, if not on, but by the lake, more so than the river. I moved to Midtown Atlanta, and I opened a map and I saw a river on it. And so I did the obvious thing, was I asked people who were from Atlanta where I could go to enjoy, explore that river. And they all pointed me up to the National Park Service, Chattahoochee National Recreation Area, which is a wonderful resource. But it's located north of the city. And I lived in Midtown. So I was looking at a river that was due west of where I was living, not very far. And I consistently got the answer that I couldn't go to that river. And that just kind of stuck in my mind. That seemed strange to me. As Andrew said, Atlanta was founded, well, the conventional story is that Atlanta is a train city. But if we trace that back, actually, like most cities or settlements, it was founded on the river, specifically at the point of the confluence of Peachtree Creek and the Chattahoochee River. That is the true birthplace of modern Atlanta. It's from that point that the creeks, the Native Americans created, and the European settlers traded at the now famous trading post of Buckhead, is kind of in line with that spot. That train was initially supposed to be on the river. It topographically did not work. So when the surveyor came, he was unable to put it next to the river. And the spot that he eventually found to locate the river was at Terminus. And so that's the narrative that we have. But like most cities, Atlanta was founded on a river. Not the original settlement was a river. I took that question that I had about where is this river and why don't people know about it, I took it with me to Georgia Tech. My first midlife crisis that had me at in graduate school around the age of 40. And I asked that very question during my studies. I wanted to look at cities that did not have iconic rivers. They weren't Vienna. It wasn't Paris with the Seine. I wanted to look at cities where there were rivers, but they weren't quite iconic, but they were thinking about their rivers. And I looked at Los Angeles, I looked at Denver, and I looked at Dallas. And all of those cities were doing significant things to rediscover their rivers. And Atlanta kind of hadn't gotten to that awareness level yet. So I did that. And then frankly, I learned some really important things in my study and in my research. I learned that a lot of people don't know that Atlanta has the city of Atlanta, the northwest boundary, is the river for 8 miles. I learned that from essentially Buckhead down to Chattahoochee Bend State Park, there was only one spot that you could physically go get on the river. I didn't need to go to graduate school to learn this, but I already knew that Atlanta was a city defined by cars. And as my friend and hero, Ryan Gravel on this call says, we need more places defined by nature, not defined by cars. Nobody does that better than Ryan. And so that resonates with me, that how is nature a part of our lives? And in this case, what I was learning is that it wasn't. And from there, I co-founded, along with Steve Nygren and Walter Brown, an organization called Chattahoochee Now. And we had multiple goals, but first and foremost, it was access. And it was equitable access. What does it mean in a metro area that you can't get to a river for a large percentage of your population? And not surprisingly, a population that has lower economic status. What does that mean? And so we asked those questions. And I tested my hypothesis. And Andrew, I think if you're able to, you can tested that hypothesis one day on the Beltline, of course. And Andrew will show you what Atlantans think of our river.
Did you know that Atlanta has a river? No.
I've heard like legends that there's a river in Atlanta. I've never seen it myself. It's like a leprechaun.
You could draw where you think the river is.
This is gonna go really badly. Somewhere like over here. Is that kind of close?
So maybe I would say I'm not really sure.
So yeah. So one of the I guess that the guy and that girl, they got a little closer. For those of you who actually don't know where the river is, they were closest. The other two were way far off. So yeah, I was not off base in thinking that this was a challenge. And then I was fortunate, just as Ryan was, I don't want to say ending because it's never an end, but his formal practice of architecture at Parkins and Will and going off on his own. I think we became the first project of 6 Pitch, if that's right, Ryan. We produced a vision for the 53 miles of the Chattahoochee River. And we produced an event, again, that I said asked a much simpler question than the one that Jonathan's asking. Our event was called Where the F is the River? Got a lot of attention. People wanted to know, and we produced a report that talked about this idea, about how hard it was to get to the river. And we created a vision for the river. Oh, yep, there you go. That is our an evening, right, at Dad's Garage that we did, where we presented a larger vision for the river. And I think there's another slide that is there one more picture there? I don't know if you can get to it if you're able to. That just shows, I think Ryan risked his life for that picture. That's the only reason I wanted you to, if you were able to show it, with his truck parked, somehow managed to park on a bridge, Ryan, and take a picture of how hard it is actually to see the river. Most of us are just driving over the river. That's the one. We need to see it, we need to get there. So, you know, before we can care about a river, we need to see it, we need to get there. And yeah, I appreciate the risk you took to take that photo. Thank you, Ryan. But yeah, I mean, what is, there's some good news about this story. It's already, you know, some real bright spots. I would say the bright spots are that there's some great grassroots works that's been done already. Been done by the Riverkeeper and cleaning the river for sure, by Groundwork Atlanta, and doing some great work within the city of Atlanta in getting folks to the river. There's and then most recently in a master plan produced by the Trust for Public Land, the ARC, Cobb County, and the city of Atlanta. So some real bright spots as well.
Yeah, well, great. Well, thank you for what you're doing and for getting behind Atlanta River Time as well. Jodi's taken us on tours of the river highlights of Atlanta and helped us and Jonathon pick the right places to set the stage for this effort.
Because you wouldn't have found them yourself.
No. It's like I had no idea. Speaking of things I had no idea about, when Jonathon and I spoke with Ryan Gravel a few weeks back, he told us he was working on some projects and he mentioned some rivers, and I'm like, where is that? I had no idea that was a river anywhere. And it's generically named the South River. I mean, no disrespect to the South River, I just didn't know it was there. So Ryan, I wonder if you can talk to us about your experiences, and you know, there seem to be some parallels between a project like the Beltline and taking, again, railroad tracks, trains, and turning them into connectivity for the city, regenerating areas of the city, and maybe a more natural track of water, if you will, or flow of water. Tell us what you've been doing, what you're seeing, and how you think Atlanta River Time might fit into any of this.
Sure. Thanks, Andrew. It's great to be here, and always great to share screens with Jodi. And it was Chattahoochee Now's work was the first project I did when I went out on my own. It was awesome. So thanks for taking a chance on me. It worked out, I think. Anyway, yeah, I've been lucky to work on since the Beltline on other big infrastructure projects in the region, primarily around water. Most of the major waterways in the region. We heard talk of the Peachtree Creek. We talked about the Chattahoochee work, of course. I've also done work in the Flint River, the headwaters of the Flint River are under the airport. And then currently working with the Nature Conservancy on the South River. If you don't know, Atlanta sits high on the subcontinental divide. So 2/3 of the region drains into the Chattahoochee River and down to the Gulf of Mexico. The rest of the region drains into the South River, which becomes the Ocmulgee and then the Altamaha and flows to the Atlantic Ocean. And so that ridge line, that subcontinental divide, is where the railroads crossed over. That's why Atlanta is there, right? So we're but so the rivers, that's water, it's drainage, it's basically infrastructure. It's natural infrastructure, and obviously highly modified in many places and contaminated and everything else, but it's infrastructure nonetheless. And if you understand the Beltline, which is obviously about transportation primarily, but also green space and community development and other things, it's infrastructure also. But the focus of it isn't the infrastructure, that's the tools for accomplishing the goal. The goal is the lives that we want to lead. The reason people love the Beltline is because it's making Atlanta into the kind of place that they want to live their lives. And so that's the way to think about infrastructure. From my perspective, that's the goal of infrastructure, to support the kind of lives that we want. And so water being sort of a obvious form of infrastructure because of its not only because it's necessary, but because also water has a unique connection to our humanity and our very life. And so, so that's the way I see it. And so then I get to work on these projects that want to think about it in that kind of a way. And so I had the South River work came out of a project I was doing with the City of Atlanta, the Department of City Planning, which another place I crossed paths with Jodi on the Atlanta city design to imagine how the region's going to change and how do we design that change to grow into the best version of ourselves. And there's a lot of ideas that came out of that. The one was for a very large regional park in Southeast Atlanta, organized around the South River. It is Metro Atlanta's last chance to have a major forest inside 285. It's bigger than Stone Mountain Park, but inside 285. It's made up of, the landscape is made up of landfills and truck yards and degraded urban land and some beautiful moments of forest and a few handful of parks, and crafted into 3,500 acre landscape. And so the idea is to create a vision and aspiration for what kinds of things that this forest could do for us, what kinds of lives this forest could create for us, how it could support the communities that are there now, create ladders of economic opportunity, create spaces for wildness and habitat and all of that. And also, yes, address water quality and water control kinds of issues headed downstream. And so we're in the early stages of it. Since coming out of the city design, I started working with the Nature Conservancy. I've been working with them for about 4 years on this project. We are in the thick of it, you know, where this is early Beltline days. Like there are a lot of people who don't get it. They don't see it yet. And so we're trying to inspire them and compel them to come to the table and see this big vision. And of course, unsurprisingly, while this area has been a real dumping ground for a lot of it, which all of Atlanta's waterways are, right? They've been dumping grounds for generations because they're like the Chattahoochee River, but in many cases, often more challenging. They're invisible. We don't know them. We don't see them. We ignored them. We bypassed them. We bridged over them. We don't see them at all. They've been dumping grounds, but now those landscapes are also the front lines of gentrification and change. And so the city is going to more than double its population in the next 20 years. The region is going to grow by 3 million people by 2050. That's like moving Charlotte to Atlanta in 20 years without doing anything about regional transportation. And so the economic pressure that puts on these landscapes of in town and the closer in suburbs of Atlanta that have walkability, that have access to transit, that have general proximity to downtown and everything else is really significant. So they're under pressure. And I'm going to share with you one site, just so you know, if you want to get involved in the South River, because I can't help myself because we're in the thick of it. There's a 340-acre forest owned by the city of Atlanta, but outside the city limits. In unincorporated southwest DeKalb County, it's called the Atlanta Prison Farm. It's been proposed to be a park for 25 years. And suddenly, about a month and a half ago, the city announced they're going to build a police training facility there. Without any public comment, the neighborhoods found out about it in the newspaper. And of course they can't, the reason they want to put it there is because the neighborhoods don't have any say. They don't have a voice in City Hall. They're not city residents, so they can't vote for the mayor or the city council. And so we're trying to stop that. That facility could be anywhere. I'm going to post in the chat in just a second how you can help. The most immediate thing this week is that the Atlanta City Council's Finance Executive Committee is meeting on Wednesday. They are deciding whether they're going to give a ground lease to the Atlanta Police Foundation. It's the point of no return. If they do it, we've just lost 350 acres of forest. That's the centerpiece for this bigger vision. You can, it's a Zoom meeting, so if you want to call ahead of time and voice your public comment, that's Tuesday afternoon from 4 to 7. The time will be in the chat with the phone number that you call. We also have private landowners, movie studios, bulldozing on 150 acres here and there. We've got smaller developers creeping around the edges. If we want to do this, we have to figure it out. We have to pay for it. It's going to be expensive and it's going to be big, but we have to do it because the city is going to change. And if we don't want it to grow into something we don't recognize anymore, we want it to grow into the best version of Atlanta that we possibly can imagine. And so anyway, I'm off on that little tangent. I'll be quiet about it now. But
Yeah, that's great.
Atlanta does have waterways. It's not just the Chattahoochee River. It's
Yes.
it's all of them. And when you start seeing them, you can't unsee them. And how that affects Jonathon's work, I'm going to leave him to figure out.
Well, we'll be tapping back. We'll be tapping you again, Ryan, for your brain power on that. But one thing we do know is that art, whether it's provocative conceptual art like Jonathon does, or painting or music or anything like that, is a great way to raise awareness, raise communication. And Serenbe has done a phenomenal job, speaking of areas, in and near Atlanta that have done a great job with development, and also using a great job of using art and culture to connect to the environment. So I know we're running up against the hour here. I hope we can, if any of you can stay with us a few more minutes, we'd love to let this just run a little bit over so Michael can have a chance to talk and we have some time for a few questions. If you can, that's great. If not, I understand. But Michael Bettis is with Serenbe, with Air Serenbe. And again, if you haven't been there, I'll show you some images. But Michael, talk a little bit about that. What's this little village down south of Atlanta doing with an Institute of Art, Culture, and the Environment, and an artist in residency program? And why are you getting behind River Time?
Thank you. Yeah. So Serenbe is a wonderful kind of idyllic community, again, south of Atlanta, that exists in this pocket of space that, unless you are familiar with it, you don't quite know that it's there. I grew up, pretty local to it and wasn't aware. And then when artists will come into residence and they think, well, I'm about to go out into the middle of nowhere. And then they realize, actually, I'm only about 30 minutes to curbside to the airport. I can't believe it. And then when they arrive in Serenbe and they see everything that this place offers to them, they're even more blown away by the fact that this very intentional agrihood exists in this space so close to the major city of Atlanta.
Did you say agrihood?
Agrihood, yes. Okay. There's a buzzword for everyone. So yes, this really intentional space that over time has grown into this excellent community that realized pretty close to its inception the importance of art and its relation to the environment around it. So beginning in about 2007, they formed the Serenbe Institute, and their goal as a 501c3 nonprofit was to honor the surrounding land and bring arts and culture to this pocket of Chattahoochee Hills. The artist residency formed a couple years after that, and I've now been here for almost 5 years. I'm coming up on my 5-year anniversary with Air Serenbe. And we know that the importance of the artists themselves that are creating these projects and that are affecting our overall culture, there also exists the need to have spaces available for these artists to do their work. And an artist residency is exactly that. It's a sabbatical for creativity. It's a space where people like Jonathon can come and not simply work on the project Atlanta River Time, but given the location, it almost seemed too good to be true and perfect in a way that he would begin, especially this work on the Chattahoochee River, both so close to the city of Atlanta and here. When you're driving into Serenbe over a major parkway, you will cross over the Chattahoochee River. And a much safer way to take a photograph of it as well, should you decide to park your car. And Andrew mentioned at the beginning of this discussion that one of the initiatives that Air Serenbe has created beginning in 2017 and revisited this year is something called Filmer, where we capture the artists in residence, a short documentary film about their process and person. This year, we decided to take a little bit of a different approach and solely focus on the project itself and the artists themselves and the filmmaker themselves. And Andrew and Jonathan reached out to me earlier this year as a chance to have Jonathan come in residence, work on this project, for us to hold workshops around the Chattahoochee River. Again, our location is pretty ideal for this project. And all the while to document this process, something as a way to share with the community writ large. This area where we are located in Chattahoochee Hills and South Fulton doesn't have a lot of arts programming serving this area. The Serenbe Institute and Air Serenbe have really taken charge over the years to be sure that both the community of Serenbe and the overall Chattahoochee Hills, South Fulton area are witness and privy to the amazing folks that come all from around the country, Jonathan being one. Something that this exists in a place like Alaska, and we're going to hopefully bring this, down here. We are bringing this down here to the Chattahoochee River and down to Chattahoochee Hills in Atlanta. And the base camp, as Andrew referred to it as, will be here at Air Serenbe. And we're very excited to be able to capture this process and be able to nurture, these processes and move forward with that. Jonathan mentioned in his talk about the whole concept of river time is to understand how we reconnect with time. And that's kind of what a residency is about as well. It's a chance to reconnect with the time and space and do what otherwise you may not have either of those to do.
Hey, Michael, can you just before we move on, I want you to just tell people about those buildings behind you, because it's an example of the kind of things you're doing in your facility and where the artists stay.
Absolutely. So I'm sitting in front of, not literally, but I am sitting in front of, it's too good of a backdrop to pass up, our two cottages where our artists will stay. Jonathan will be staying in one of these two, the red and the black cottage. Both of these were designed by Royal Studio from Auburn University. And out of their 20K house line, the idea is that a home can be designed and built for $20,000. And so we brought this from Hale County in Alabama to Chattahoochee Hills and designed these Greencraft certified buildings for our artists to stay in residence. And ever since we built these, they touched ground in 2016. Our program has grown exponentially. We've hosted more artists every year, and they're really great to look at. They make a great silhouette.
they're great inside as well. We're currently looking for a new home in Atlanta, and I can tell you that if those were in Atlanta, they'd go for about 2.5 million. I don't know. Anyway, but do go check out Air Serenbe's site and look at their list of artists and writers and so on that have been on there. A friend of mine, and probably some of yours as well, Jessica Handler, was just down there, and her Instagram and Facebook was just like popping with images of Serenbe and its inspiration to her. So I hope and believe it'll be a great place for Jonathan to be and to connect with all of us as he helps us figure out how to make river time real in Atlanta and in the surrounding area. We do envision this, Jonathan, stay here. He'll be down in September, middle September, but we do see this as a long-term project, right, Jonathan? Maybe 3 years. If we're really looking at, I don't mean staying at Air Serenbe for 3 years, although maybe.
And I see it as a 1,000-year project, but
1,000-year, okay, yeah. But it takes, it's starting with you know, some of what you saw done in Alaska online, and hopefully maybe even before the end of the year, we'll be beginning to get that kind of work up. Moving to things, activities by the river, such as the almanac programs Jonathan mentioned, and other events by the river, and Peachtree Creek as well. Primarily Peachtree Creek near Zonolite, near the Atlanta Zen Center and Floataway Cafe and so on. But also near the Confluence Bridge, which is a $2.5 million. Speaking of 2.5 million, is the cost of that bridge that Southfork Conservancy has helped raise at the confluence of the North and South Forks of Peachtree Creek in Buckhead. Again, you would never know it was there. You kind of have to go underneath the highways to know. But hopefully we'll bring some of you guys out there. And then long-term, a vision of maybe, erosion calendars in the river, maybe a meander calendar that follows the winding flow of some waterway in and around here, and then ultimately maybe a public clock tower to rival Rich's clock downtown. We'll have one based on river time. Before that, though, over the next few months, there are a number of things we hope to do. One is we'd like to introduce you to Jonathan in a broader way. And as part of that, would like to make you familiar with this new book, which is a chronicle of not all, because Jonathan is incredibly prolific, but a lot of Jonathan's work to date. This book, Thought Experiments, you can get it from Amazon and or reserve it now. And it is this, just happens to be PDF version, but you can see all of these. I mean, it would take a while to I'm just going to see if I can find one. Okay, here we go. This is a 1,000-year clock. Is this the 100 or 1,000-year clock, Jonathan?
Those are cameras, but
cameras, not clocks.
And those are cameras that have an exposure time of 100 years.
Yeah, so you take a picture over the course of 100 years, and these are set up in places like where they were in Berlin or something like that, and Arizona, various places.
Yeah, so the first project is with many of these cameras looking at Berlin, but we've subsequently done this all over the world. Not yet Atlanta, as it turns out.
So anyway, you know, you'll want to get this if you find this River Time project fascinating. You'll want to see these other works that Jonathan has done, and you'll really appreciate the genius of this guy, who you know I'm an acolyte of, if you will. Not that I'm a genius, but I aspire to this level of creativity. And the other thing is, in this book, at the back of it, there is, 20 sort of tenets of provocative creativity. How is it phrased in that book?
Well, they're thought experiments. I see myself, because my background is in philosophy, and I fled academia only to find my way back into philosophy as a public practice, as a public service. And so I've used the thought experiment from philosophy as a way in which to do so. And I see any and all of my projects, in a sense, as being thought experiments, asking what if. But in the true spirit of an experiment, I'm certainly not the only one who should be undertaking it. Others should as well. And so what I've attempted to do is to open up the space for others to be able to also take on these premises, these hypotheses, these alternate realities, and to see what might become of them. And likewise with river time, meaning if there are two municipal clocks, one down the road from ours and the other one is by somebody else, it isn't a rogue clock, it's equally valid. And I think that we in general just need to think about any of these as being explorations that we're undertaking together, where there might be multiple manifestations.
Well, I'm so excited, Jonathan, for this project. I'm so grateful that you'll be coming to Atlanta and help giving both our art and our environmental communities, the kinds of kicks in the pants, gentle and humorous, but compelling, that will benefit from. And before we go, I know there are a bunch of questions. I mean, I love the chat dialogue that's been going on. I wish we could address all the comments. I don't even think I've been on a Zoom meeting where I've seen so much interaction, which is in chat. If we don't get to address them all here, we'll download this chat file and see how else we might be able to answer these. But any questions in particular, Anne, that you see that you want to make sure we address before we sign off?
Hi, I am trying to get, the chat on this has been fantastic. Thank you all. Yes, there are so many questions, and I would just stress that as Jonathon begins this work and his exchange, the exchange is really set up as that, a period of a year or two when an artist really gets to know our community and we get to know him, and the needs of the community and what's pertinent about this place have an opportunity to filter into the project. And because of COVID and everything being online, Jonathon has not had feet on the ground in Atlanta yet, but
we've lugged them around with Zoom and the phone.
So it's this weird thing where he's seen so much and spoken to so many people, but not had the physical experience of being here. So you've all brought up so many important things, and there will be so much. I would say if you, to keep up with what's going on, we will be doing public programs around his visit, September 14th through 24th, which we imagine as being one of multiple visits he will make to the city over the course of this project. There will be more opportunities to do workshops with him, have coffee with him, have dinner with him, discourse, add important elements. And I would just say you can go onto our website, fluxprojects.org, sign up to receive our newsletter. You can follow us at Flux Projects online on social, and we will be putting that out. And I know Andrew will be sharing that as well. And so I would just say that this is the very beginning of the conversation, certainly not the end. And I don't think any of us could really foretell right now how this project will end up, except to say that I feel absolutely certain it will not end up as we all envision at the moment, but something much, much greater because of all of your input. So thank you. And Andrew, thank you for all that you have done to bring this project. You were really the one that brought this project to us, and it's been so exciting.
Well, thank you, Anne. Thanks to our panelists, Jonathon, Jodi, Ryan, Michael. Thanks again to Flux, our friends at Southfork Conservancy, and thanks to everybody who's joined us today. I look forward to hanging out with you down by the rivers and creeks of Atlanta, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.